It is a great time to be a Spider-Man fan right now. We're getting excellent movies with the Spider-Verse films, excellent video games with Insomniac's Spider-Man franchise on PlayStation, and some of the best Spider-Man comics we've gotten in a long time. And no, I'm not talking about Amazing Spider-Man. I'm talking about this, Ultimate Spider-Man. The current one, not the one from like the early 2000s. This shit is so good, man. I'm telling you, if you're not reading this right now, what are you doing with your life? However, the one area Spider-Man has been lacking in has been TV. Historically, Spider-Man has had some amazing cartoons, but the past few years have been a little rough. Let me break it down for you. On the Mount Rushmore of Spider-Man cartoons, 3 of those 4 heads have always been constants. You have the original 1960s Spider-Man cartoon, which is beloved in all its cheesy glory. Then you have Spider-Man the Animated Series from the 90s, which has the greatest intro ever. Better than 90s X-Men if you ask me. And then you have Spectacular Spider-Man, which as far as I'm concerned, is the greatest Spider-Man cartoon ever, and straight up one of the best interpretations of the character ever. But on the Mount Rushmore of Spider-Man cartoons, after those first 3 picks, there's that elusive 4th spot. Some people will tell you that the new Spider-Man Adventures cartoon deserves to be up there. Others will say Ultimate Spider-Man. And some people in desperate need of a medical examination will tell you that it's the most recent Spider-Man cartoon. But ladies and gentlemen, I come to you today with good news. After many years and several other Spider-Man cartoons, that elusive 4th spot finally has something to fill it. We gotta talk about Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is the greatest Spider-Man cartoon we've gotten since Spectacular Spider-Man. And I'm here to tell you that it is officially up there with the big boys. So let's get into it. Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man originally began life as Spider-Man freshman year. Originally, the show was supposed to be canon to the MCU. Originally, it was going to be about the origin story of Tom Holland's Spider-Man, which we never really got to see in the movies. This was changed eventually, however, and Spider-Man freshman year became Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man and became its own thing. Slowly over time, we got more looks at the show and some images and concept art, which seemed promising. And then we actually saw the show in action. I think it's fair to say that the initial consensus after seeing the show was not too good. People were really down on the animation, myself included, and it seemed like a lot of people were going into this with very low expectations. Again, including me. Then me and everybody else actually watched the show, and holy shit, it's fantastic. You might even call it amazing. I'm sorry, I had to put at least one Spider-Man pun in there. I'm just as disappointed in myself as you are. Anyways, let's talk about how great this show is. For starters, I was somebody who was initially skeptical about the idea of the show taking place within the MCU's canon. Sure, that could be neat, but it felt like it would be very limiting to what they could do with the show. And what the show has turned into instead is so much better. The show is essentially in an alternate version of the MCU. We get glimpses at other heroes like Iron Man and Captain America, Doctor Strange. The Sokovia Accords are referenced multiple times. The first episode of the show even ends with a shot-for-shot remake of the first time we see Peter in Civil War. Except instead of meeting Iron Man at the end, he meets a different character. Okay, it's time to get into some spoilers here, so if you haven't seen the show, you should probably go check it out first. Now you've been warned, here we go. At the end of the pilot episode, Peter bumps into none other than Norman Osborn. This initial change to the story, and even the way Peter gets his powers, are indicative of what this show ends up doing. Just like with the current Ultimate Spider-Man comics, Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is taking some big swings here. Yes, we're getting another story of Spider-Man's origin and his time in high school. We get characters like Aunt May, and Harry Osborn, and Norman Osborn. But the show changes things just enough to make them feel interesting and fresh. For example, the characters. The biggest of these changes is having Norman Osborn stand in for Tony Stark. Initially, Norman takes Peter under his wing, not knowing that he's Spider-Man. But when he learns Spider-Man's identity, we see his relationship with Peter start out somewhat positively. Norman really comes across like he's trying to nurture and mentor Peter. But throughout the season, we see how Norman can't quite be trusted, and the relationship between him and Peter is just so fun to watch. Then there's Peter's social circle at school. Although Harry's still around, characters like MJ and Gwen Stacy aren't in this series. Instead, Peter's close friends are Harry, Lonnie Lincoln, Pearl, and Nico Minoru. What's cool about this social circle is that they're all somebody. Harry obviously is Norman's kid. Pearl winds up being the superhero Wave. Nico Minoru is a member of the Runaways in the comics. But the standout of Pete's friends is Lonnie Lincoln, aka Tombstone. It was such a great and fresh idea to take Tombstone and make him Peter's age, and make them friends in high school. The way we see Lonnie end up getting forced to work for a gang in New York, but ultimately come to lead said gang, is such an interesting character arc. Lonnie really is one of the standout characters from this show, and I can't wait to see where they take his and Pete's relationship. Then there's the bad guys. Spider-Man has one of the 2 greatest rogues galleries in all of comics, the other being Batman's, of course. And the way the show uses such D-list Spider-Man villains before building up to some of the heavier hitters is so well done. In the early episodes of the show, we get really deep-cut Spider-Man villains like Speed Demon, Tarantula, even fucking Unicorn. But Then we start to get to the heavy hitters. We see the Chameleon. We get a pre-tentacle arms Dr. Octopus. And then we get the big bad of the season, the Scorpion. I love the Scorpion. I think he's a really underutilized Spider-Man villain, and the way he's portrayed in this is awesome. His design is really cool. It's not as cheesy as some looks, but also not overly robotic like his design in the Spider-Man video games is. It's this perfect kind of balance that I love. Speaking of designs, we have to talk more about the animation again. Like I said earlier, I really did not like the animation of this show when I first saw it. But I gotta be honest, over time, it really started to grow on me. It reminded me a lot of Ultimate Spider-Man. Not the comics, but the video game. I grew up playing the shit out of Ultimate Spider-Man on PS2, and I always loved that game's cel-shaded comic booky art style. And what I quickly realized watching the show is that it reminded me a lot of that, both in its 3D animation and the way it uses comic book panels and stylings in some of the animation. And so over time, it really grew on me. And like with Scorpion, the character designs for this show are great. Specifically the other superheroes we see in the world, the villains Peter fights, and Spider-Man himself. His initial costume is terrible, and I love it. It's got such a rinky-dink homemade feel that's just perfect. And the idea of giving Peter this big canister that he wears so that he can adjust the knobs for his web shooters is just so cool. Then there's the suit Norman Osborn gives him, which is clearly inspired by the Future Foundation suit, which is also great. And by the time we reach the end of the show, we get Pete in the classic blue and red. And god damn does he look good. Also, what do the greatest Spider-Man cartoons all have? They all have incredible intro songs, and Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is no different. Now, is it cheating because the theme song for Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man samples the 1960s theme? Yeah, probably, but I don't care. This shit is awesome. Even the end credits theme is great. So if you couldn't tell, there's just so much to gush about this show. The writing is great, the performances are great, the characters are awesome, and their interactions and arcs that they go on are fantastic. The animation does really work for this show, and the show is just so unique and fresh and different and fun. If you're a Spider-Man fan in any capacity, you owe it to yourself to check the show out. Before season 1 of the show came out, it was announced that the show had already been greenlit for seasons 2 and 3. And I think the highest compliment I can pay this show is that I want those other seasons now. Immediately. I can't wait for more of this Spider-Man in this world. My hope is that Marvel and Disney really give this show the time it needs to fully develop. What we've got here in this first season is great, and there's so much room to grow. I really hope they don't rush this. Let the very talented people behind this show do their thing and take the time they need to continue telling this story. And I don't want them to do too much too fast. For example, when the first season ended, it was announced that Gwen Stacy would be coming to the show next season. But we also got art of her as Spider-Gwen. Now don't get me wrong, I love Spider-Gwen. I've read a ton of her comics, and she's like my favorite character in the 2 Spider-Verse films. But I feel like a lot of modern Spider-Man media feels this need to really get as many Spider people into it as possible. We've seen that in the Spider-Verse films, obviously, and No Way Home. Even the Insomniac games introduced Miles Morales basically immediately, and the post-credit scene for Spider-Man 2 introduces another Spider-Person. So while it's cool that we're going to be getting Spider-Gwen, I don't want them to do too much too quickly. Let it simmer a little bit first. But beyond that, I hope they continue to flesh out this show, flesh out the characters, continue to develop them and their arcs, introduce more villains, and hopefully continue to take the lore and Spider-Man stories that we all know and love and continue to twist them just enough to make things feel fresh and different. The show is spectacular, and you owe it to yourself to check it out. Hopefully you do, and let me know what you think. Until then, I'll be waiting here for the return of Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man.